Hello, readers. This is Justin's 52 Books, where I discuss my selections for the 52 Book Club's 2023 Reading Challenge. And I'm doing something special this year. I'm reading only science fiction written by women, trying to explore the legacy of women writing science fiction with the 52 Book Club Challenge. So this is week 4, and I'm talking about prompt for a book with a title that starts with letter H. My selection for this prompt was The Heads of Cerberus by Gertrude Burrows Bennett, writing under the pen name or pseudonym or whatever you call it. I'm not entirely even sure what the correct technical term is, but writing as Frances Stevens, which was originally serialized in a 1919 pulp called The Thrill Book, and then later collected in book form in 1952. First off, some thoughts about the prompts. This is the second of 3-letter prompts in the 2023 Reading Challenge, and like I said last week in the G video, now we're doing H. The reason I like these reading challenges and the prompts is because they give criteria for choosing your next book, and even arbitrary criteria like the first letter of the book title creates a new and interesting way to evaluate the books you're going to read, and that's important to look at what you want to read and to remember the things you wanted to read a long time ago, or to find new sources of information about what you want to read. It can really push you into new ways of thinking. It can really push you into new books that are coming out, and it can even push you into old books and old ways of thinking. And that's the case for this week with The Heads of Cerberus. So, Gertrude Burrows Bennett, Frances Stevens, same person. I guess the Frances Stevens was supposed to be a little bit more masculine sounding, so that may be why she was writing as Frances Stevens. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if it was the perception of a woman writing or why she was using a pseudonym, but she did, and I'm going to refer to both of them as the same person throughout. So just remember, Gertrude Burrows Bennett, Frances Stevens, same person. And I've been seeing her name pop up more and more lately on lists of science fiction to check out, and like podcasts and interviews of people, science fiction people, the literary science fictional tastemakers and gatekeepers. I've been seeing them talk about this person, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the reckoning that science fiction has been going through with some of its founders, or at least its proponents, having real problems with real people, people of color, and people just that weren't like them. And we are examining those people, and specifically we are examining H.P. Lovecraft, the founder of Cosmic Horror, and blatant racist, belligerently so. Like, he wrote his monsters to have the qualities that he saw as lesser, and he wrote that in with a lot of racism in certain cases. We're open to looking for alternatives, and in that process we're looking at who predated who with what ideas, and that's what this week is all about with Frances Stevens's The Heads of Cerberus. It has ideas that predate Lovecraft, and it has them in spades. So 3 unwilling compatriots are taken from their comfortable home in 1918 Philadelphia through this ash-like substance that they found in a vial that has 3 dog heads on it. That's where the name Heads of Cerberus come from. The ash is the dusty ash is purportedly from the gates of Hades from old Grecian myth times. The 3 compatriots are then transported to an unknown realm where they meet strange beings who talk about traveling through time, and then they are propelled forward by one of those beings into a dystopian Philadelphia in 2118, 200 years before the writing of the book. There, they encounter such ideas, and I'm going to number them off. There's 4 of them that I wanted to highlight. Numbered citizenry. So the citizenry have numbers on pens, little yellow pens, and if you don't have your number on you, or you don't have a number, then you're, I don't know, put to death, I guess. 2, religious zealotry in the name of a political leader. They are William Penn is on the statues in Philadelphia, so they they have turned William Penn into a godhead, and then they have whoever is scamming into the leadership role is doing it is I think the re-embodiment of William Penn. It got a little confused at a certain point, or I did, but this whole it's a religious deification of a leader. 3, gladiatorial challenges. They never call it gladiatorial, but it's gladiatorial challenges for positions of power. It's a really interesting take on cronyism. Stevens calls the book, the title that's given to the leaders the positions are called superlatives, and they get names like loveliest and mercy and cleverest and virtue, and they call it the civil service exam. They all have jobs according to that. So the quickest is in charge of the police force or something like that. I don't remember exactly who did what, but the superlative system is really interesting. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight, it's one of the characters escapes and finds a history book, and he was reading about the history of that time. And so Stevens has created a world history where Philadelphia gets isolated. And Philadelphia is actually the size of Pennsylvania, but it gets isolated and isolated and isolated, and they are just over time they are keeping out the others, keeping out anyone that doesn't look like them or that isn't right. And it gets isolated and isolated, and that's how the whole world is. It's full of these little cities, but we only see Philadelphia in the Heads of Cerberus. The crew eventually make it back to their time, and in a method that reminded me just a little bit too much like a Scooby-Doo unmasking at the end, we find out that the dust has some sort of scientific quality that allows people to separate their atoms and enter the astral plane. And that's far-fetched and kind of silly, but it's worth noting because Francis Stevens isn't using magic for her gateway, isn't using her magic for her reason du jour. What she is doing is trying to use science for the reason things are happening. That makes it science fiction, and that is important because it's a foundation that gets built upon in science fiction that we have now. That's important. At least it's important to me. Some things I really liked. Well, I talked about the superlative system earlier. I really liked it. I thought it was a cool idea, and it's done really well, and it's really familiar, but very original at the same time. Another thing I liked, well, it's just the sheer amount of original ideas. The Heads of Cerberus was written at a time where, to my mind, the only thing that Stevens would have had, like fantastical literature that Stevens would have had access to, would be H.G. Wells, Mary Shelley, Arthur Conan Doyle. I think Jack London's Iron Foot may have been out by that point. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't look it up before I did, but Jack London, maybe, depending on what he was writing at that time. And then Gulliver's Travels as well. That's really all I can think of. I'm sure that there's more, and I'm sure people can correct me on that, but my point stands that there wasn't a whole lot of fantastical fiction that predated the Heads of Cerberus. So she's not calling on these ideas from other sources. She's coming up with them by herself, alone, in not a vacuum, but not a breadth of ideas that we have today. That's important, and it really helped me understand the legacy that Stevens deserves. It was a pleasure and a revelation to find out about. Some things I didn't care for all that much. There are issues with the book, of course. Some of the coincidences in the book are a little contrived. That's the best word I can come up for. It's not horrible, and it's not the worst I've ever read as far as being contrived, but it certainly wouldn't withstand a lot of scrutiny and criticism today as far as not plot holes, but motivations for why things happen and characters. Very much of its time. In language as well, it's very much of its time. Early 20th century writing. If you can read Sherlock Holmes, you can read this. It's not difficult, but it is a little bit different, a little more stilted, a little less vernacular, for lack of a better word. Other thoughts? Well, I actually owe Stevens a bit of an apology, perhaps. Earlier this year, I did a hot take where I just kind of threw out ideas of books that I might read when the 52 Book Club 2023 prompts came out. Like just that day, I threw out ideas, and I was talking about this book, and I was talking about Stevens as an alternative to Lovecraft because Lovecraft is so racist. And what I said was that, well, joke's on everyone, Stevens is just as racist. That's not untrue, but that was based off of a short story that I had read called Unseen, Unfeared. Um, in the Heads of Cerberus, there is hardly any racist language or any of that there. That doesn't mean that Francis Stevens or Gertrude Burrows Bennett wasn't racist and that they didn't have that in them. It just means that while you're reading the Heads of Cerberus, you don't have to confront that on the page over and over and over again, um, which is nice. That doesn't mean that she wasn't one, but you don't have to react to the garbage the entire time. Ultimately, I'm really glad to have spent my time with this book. It has furthered my kind of cultural understanding of the early days of science fiction, and I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate it for what it was, just a really good adventure story with some weird stuff added to it. Cool book. Other ideas that I had for other books for this prompt, again, the prompt is titles that begin with the letter H. And again, I'm reading science fiction written by women. Two touchstones of that kind of subgenre or subclassification would be Hunger Games and then Handmaid's Tale. Both of those are big landmark books for very different reasons. Both have been turned into film or television. Hunger Games, I've only read the first one of those, but for a dystopia with a YA lens, I can't think of a better book for what it is. Handmaid's Tale, same kind of thing, only very different lens. For the literary crowd to read a dystopian book and have that to relate and have dystopia be brought into not science fictional but speculative fictional kind of stable. It's a very important work. If science fiction has a canon, that deserves a place in it. And then one last book I'd mention that starts with an H, His Majesty's Dragon, which starts with an H in this country, in my country, in the United States at least. It's known as Temeraire in other countries, I guess. Apparently Americans can't handle French, but basically it's just dragons during the Napoleonic Wars. Cool idea, great execution. The books, it's a series, and the books do tend to fall off a little bit in terms of, well, at least they did for me as far as interest. But hey, maybe we all be so lucky to read series of 5 and 6 books where it's like, 5 and 6 weren't as good as the first ones. Good problem to have as far as I'm concerned. If we're not talking about just books by women, but science fiction as a whole, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is good. I wish people wouldn't stop there with pursuing humorous science fiction. I think there's a lot more than Douglas Adams. I think there's Robert Sheckley. I think there's Connie Willis. But Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a good book that starts with H. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Best crossover of science fiction and horror that I can think of. Lots of meat to that book. Really cool idea. And then some more obscure books. Halting State by Charles Stross. Second person cybercrime in the near future, which is actually, it was written in 2007, so it's the past now. But it's a cool book, cool idea. Hidden Girls by Ken Liu, short stories involving the singularity and what happens to our culture when people start uploading their consciousness into the computer, and not everyone wants to, and what we can do, and what happens when people start committing crimes like that. And cool set of ideas, a lot of groundbreaking work in the Hidden Girls. And the last thing I want to mention, because it's important to what I'm doing this year with science fiction written by women, The History of Science Fiction by Xavier Dallo and Jabril Morset-Fan. That was the inspiration for me reading only women science fiction authors. That's inspiration for me for reading Francis Stevens and Gertrude Burrows Bennett just today. Inspiration for me for pursuing a lot of this. Really cool graphic novel history of science fiction. A lot of cool ideas, a lot of cool experiments in that book. I really liked it and can't recommend it more highly. I kind of go on and on about it, but hey, lift up what we love. Thanks for watching me talk about my thoughts on The Heads of Cerberus, written by Gertrude Burrows Bennett under the pen name Francis Stevens. This has been week 4 of Justin's 52 Books, and I was talking about prompt for a book with a title that starts with the letter H. For more information on the 52 Book Club, you can check them out on their website, the52bookclub.com. You can also check them out on Goodreads and Facebook and Instagram. I'm pretty active on the Facebook comment section, so maybe I'll see you there. You can also check me out on Goodreads and Storygraph, Justin's 52 Books. I hope to see you next time for prompt 5. We finish up the letter prompts with letter I, and I hope to see you there. Until then, happy reading.